Oramni Collective, had existed for 53,000 years. In that time, they had touched more stars than any other civilization in recorded history. Not conquered, not occupied, touched. Their reach extended across 120,000 light-years of the galactic rim, 14,000 inhabited worlds, 700 trillion citizens, a civilization so vast that light itself took over 100 years to travel from one end to the other. They were not warriors, they were not builders, they were not explorers in the traditional sense. They were cultivators. Their philosophy held that the universe was a garden, and sentient life was its most precious flower. They seeded worlds. They nurtured developing species. They guided young civilizations through the dangerous early stages of technological growth. They had mentored 47 species to full interstellar capability over their long history. 47 species that now called the Oramni their benefactors, their teachers, their protectors. The Oramni had no enemies. They had made sure of it, not through threat or force, through generosity, through abundance, through making themselves so valuable to so many that harming them would be unthinkable. Every mentored species owed its existence to Oramni intervention. Every trade route, every communication network, every shared technology bore their fingerprint. They believed they were untouchable. They believed the garden would bloom forever. They were wrong. The first sign was the silence. A cluster of 17 Oramni worlds in the outer rim stopped communicating, not gradually, not with warning, all 17 at once. One moment, normal traffic. The next, nothing. No signals, no ships, no response to repeated hails. The collective dispatched an investigation team, 300 vessels, standard protocol for a communication failure of this scale. The team arrived at the first silent world and found it intact, cities still standing, infrastructure still functioning, atmosphere still breathable but empty. Every Oramni on the planet had vanished, not killed, not destroyed, removed, as if they had been plucked from the surface by an invisible hand. The team searched the other 16 worlds. Same result, every planet empty, every city intact, every person gone. 700 billion Oramni citizens vanished. The investigation team transmitted their findings to the collective leadership. Then they, too, went silent. The Oramni collective leadership convened the High Conclave within 12 hours of losing the investigation team. 1,700 delegates from across the collective's territory, representing 14,000 worlds, connected by quantum communication links that allowed instant deliberation across 120,000 light-years. Presider Kale Moth, the senior member of the conclave, had served for 11,000 years. She had overseen the mentoring of 12 species. She had navigated crises, disputes, and disasters. She had never faced anything like this. The affected region encompasses approximately 4,000 light-years, reported Analysis Director Torin Val. 17 worlds confirmed empty. The investigation team of 300 vessels also unaccounted for. Total missing personnel, approximately 700 billion. Murmurs spread through the conclave. 700 billion was a number that exceeded the population of most civilizations. The Oramni numbered 700 trillion. The loss was statistically small, but the nature of the loss was unprecedented. "Have we identified the cause?" Kalemoth asked. "No, Presider. No energy signatures consistent with known weapons. No spatial distortions indicative of displacement technology. No biological agents detected. The worlds are pristine, as if the population simply ceased to exist." "What about the mentored species in the region? Have they been affected?" 3 mentored species operate within the affected zone. All 3 report normal operations, no unusual activity, no population losses. Whatever removed the Oramni did not affect other species. This detail disturbed Kalemoth more than anything else. Selective removal, Oramni taken, other species untouched. This was not a natural phenomenon. This was targeted. Expand the investigation, she ordered. Deploy 5,000 vessels to the affected region. Establish a perimeter. I want to know if this is spreading. 5,000 vessels deployed. They established a cordon around the 4,000 light-year affected zone. They scanned, they probed, they monitored. For 19 days, nothing happened. On the 20th day, the cordon fleet began losing ships. Not to attack, not to visible enemy action. Ships simply stopped responding, one by one, scattered across the perimeter. No pattern, no warning. A vessel would be operating normally, then silence. Recovery teams sent to investigate found empty ships, hulls in. Act systems powered, crews gone. The cordon fleet lost 1,200 vessels in the first week. The conclave ordered a general retreat. All Oramni forces pulled back from the affected zone. The withdrawal was orderly, disciplined. The Oramni had not fought a war in 30,000 years, but their logistical capabilities were unparalleled. They retreated 3,000 light-years and re-established a new perimeter. 2 weeks later, the new perimeter began losing ships. The affected zone was expanding. Not quickly, approximately 50 light-years per week, a slow, methodical advance. Whatever was removing Oramni citizens was moving inward, toward the core of collective territory, toward the heart of the garden. Kael'moth watched the tactical display as the red zone crept across the map. 50 light-years per week. At that rate, it would reach the core worlds in approximately 400 years. Plenty of time. The Oramni could evacuate, relocate, preserve their civilization by abandoning the outer territories. Then the rate doubled. 100 light-years per week. Then it doubled again. 200 light-years per week. The expansion was accelerating, exponentially. Whatever was causing it was feeding on something, growing stronger as it consumed more Oramni. Each world it emptied made it faster. Each citizen it removed made it larger. Kael'moth ran the calculations. At the current acceleration curve, the affected zone would reach the core worlds in approximately 60 years. 60 years to save 700 trillion citizens. The conclave debated for 3 days. On the third day, Kael'moth made a decision that violated every principle of Oramni philosophy. She sent a signal to Earth. Earth was not an Oramni-mentored species. The Oramni had discovered humanity 400 years ago. A young civilization, primitive by Oramni standards, barely interstellar. The Oramni had observed humanity for decades, compiling detailed profiles. The species showed remarkable creativity, extreme aggression, and an unsettling capacity for both destruction and compassion. The conclave had debated mentoring humanity. The debate had lasted 40 years. It ended with a narrow vote against intervention. Humanity was too violent, too unpredictable, too resistant to guidance. The Oramni mentors who had studied humanity had warned that the species did not respond well to authority. They chafed at control. They resisted direction. They pursued their own path with a stubbornness that bordered on irrational. The conclave had classified humanity as unsuitable for mentorship and moved on. 400 years later, Presider Kael'moth was about to break that decision. Not to ask for help. The Oramni did not ask for help. They gave it. That was their nature, their identity. To ask for help would be to admit that the garden needed a gardener other than itself. Kael'moth was not asking for help. She was sending a gift. The signal contained everything the Oramni knew about the threat: sensor data, pattern analysis, the acceleration curve, the selective targeting of Oramni citizens, the expanding zone of emptiness, everything, compressed, encrypted, transmitted on a frequency that human sensors could detect. It was not a cry for aid. It was a warning, a gift of knowledge, a final act of cultivation from a species that had spent 53,000 years nurturing others. Kael'moth composed the message personally. This is the Oramni Collective. We are dying. An unknown force is removing our citizens from their worlds. It is expanding, accelerating. We estimate 60 years before it reaches our core. We are transmitting all data we have accumulated. We do not ask for assistance. We ask only that you prepare. What is coming for us will eventually reach you. Use this knowledge to survive. That is our final act of cultivation. Our last seed planted in the garden we will not live to see bloom. She transmitted the signal. One packet of data, sent toward a small yellow star in the Orion Spur, a species the Oramni had deemed unsuitable, too violent, too stubborn, too human. Then Kael'moth turned back to the tactical display and watched the red zone consume another world. She did not expect a response. She did not expect the humans to do anything with the data. They were primitive, young, 400 years behind the Oramni in technology. What could they possibly do with a warning about a threat that was defeating the most advanced civilization in the galaxy? She sent it anyway, because that is what the Oramni did. They planted seeds, even when they would not live to see them grow. The signal reached Earth 17 years after transmission. 17 years of travel at light speed. 17 years during which the Oramni situation had deteriorated beyond anything Kael'moth had predicted. The acceleration had not stopped. It had increased. The affected zone was now expanding at 1200 light years per week. The 60-year estimate had collapsed to 11. The Oramni were evacuating core worlds at maximum capacity. 700 trillion citizens in motion. The largest migration in the history of the galaxy. And still the zone advanced, faster and faster, feeding on every Oramni it touched, growing stronger with each removal. Kael'moth was dead. She had died in year 14 of the crisis. Her successor, Presider Doranval, had overseen the collapse of the outer territories and the desperate retreat toward the rim. The signal to Earth had been forgotten by everyone, except the archive systems that had logged its transmission. On Earth, the signal was received by a deep space monitoring array operated by the United Earth Defense Authority. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was the duty officer who first reviewed the incoming data packet. She read the Oramni message. She read the attached data files. She read the acceleration curves and the pattern analysis and the projected timelines. She forwarded the packet to her commanding officer with a priority classification of Omega. Omega was a designation that had never been used. It had been created 7 years ago by the Defense Authority's Strategic Planning Division, a theoretical category for threats that exceeded all existing response frameworks. Chen had never expected to use it. Her commanding officer read the packet. He forwarded it to the Defense Authority's senior leadership. They forwarded it to the Earth governments. Within 72 hours of the signal's arrival, every major human decision-maker had read the Oramni's final message. A species that had nurtured 47 civilizations to interstellar capability was dying. An unknown force was consuming them. It was accelerating, and it would eventually reach human space. The humans read the data, they studied the patterns, they ran the models. And then they did something the Oramni had never expected. They did not panic. They did not flee. They did not debate for 40 years. They began to work. The Oramni had 11 years left when the first human vessel entered their territory. Not a warship, a scout, small, fast, heavily shielded. It dropped out of transit at the edge of the affected zone and began scanning. Presider Doranval received the report with disbelief. A human ship, in collective territory, how did they get here? Their transit technology is more advanced than our profiles indicated, said Defense Coordinator Meltash. Significantly more advanced. They crossed approximately 15,000 light-years in what appears to be a single jump. A single jump. That is not possible. Our best transit systems require relay stations for jumps exceeding. Their technology does not use relay stations, Presider. We are analyzing their drive signature now. Preliminary assessment suggests they have developed a method of direct spatial folding that bypasses the need for infrastructure entirely. Dorenval processed this. 400 years ago, humanity had been barely interstellar. Now they were jumping 15,000 light-years without relay stations. Their technology had advanced at a rate that defied every model of civilizational development the Oramni had ever compiled. "What is the scout doing?" she asked. "Scanning the affected zone. They are using sensor technology that we cannot fully characterize. It appears to operate on principles we have not encountered before. They are mapping the boundary of the affected region with extreme precision." "Have they attempted to enter the zone?" "No, Presider. They are maintaining a distance of approximately 200 million kilometers from the boundary. They appear to be gathering data without making contact." Dorenval watched the tactical display. A single human icon blinking at the edge of the red zone. Tiny, insignificant, against a threat that was consuming the Oramni Collective at an accelerating rate. "Why are they here?" she asked, not to her staff, to herself. "We sent them a warning, not a request for help. Why would they come?" No one had an answer. The scout spent 11 days at the boundary. It collected data. It transmitted information back toward human space on a frequency the Oramni could not intercept. Then it departed, as quickly and quietly as it had arrived. 3 weeks later it returned, with company. 17 human vessels, not scouts, warships, each one approximately 3 kilometers in length, armed with weapons that the Oramni's sensors could detect but not identify, energy signatures that suggested power generation far beyond what ships of that size should be capable of. The human fleet took position outside the affected zone. They did not enter. They did not communicate with Oramni forces. They simply parked at the boundary and began an operation that the Oramni could not fully understand. They were building something. Construction vessels arrived, cargo SH. IPS support craft, a small industrial complex materialized in space outside the affected zone. Human engineers worked around the clock. They assembled a structure. Large, circular, approximately 40 kilometers in diameter. It took them 6 days. When it was complete, the structure activated. It generated a field that the Oramni sensors could not penetrate. Not a shield, something else. A field that interacted with the affected zone's boundary in ways that the Oramni instruments registered as anomalous. The humans were not just observing the threat. They were probing it, testing it, looking for a weakness. The Oramni had 9 years left when the human probe entered the affected zone. Not a ship, a probe, unmanned, no crew to lose. It crossed the boundary and transmitted data back to the human fleet in real time. The humans had developed a communication method that penetrated the zone's interference, something the Oramni had failed to achieve in 11 years of study. The probe traveled deep into the affected region. It passed through empty world after empty world, Oramni cities, Oramni infrastructure, Oramni everything, all intact, all deserted. The probe's sensors were mapping something the Oramni had never detected, a pattern in the emptiness, not visible, not electromagnetic, not gravitational, something else, a structure woven through the fabric of space itself. The probe's data suggested that the affected zone was not a region of space that had been attacked. It was a region of space that had been rewritten. The humans spent 3 months analyzing the probe data. Then they transmitted a message to the Oramni Collective leadership, the first direct communication between the two species. "This is the United Earth Defense Authority. We have completed our initial analysis of the entity affecting your territory. We require a meeting with your senior leadership to discuss our findings. We believe we understand what you are facing. We believe we can develop a countermeasure. Time is critical. Dorenval stared at the message. We believe we can develop a countermeasure. 11 years. 11 years the Oramni had been fighting this thing, losing, dying, retreating across their own territory, and a species they had dismissed as unsuitable for mentorship believed they could counter it. "Grant the meeting," she said. The meeting took place aboard the human flagship. Dorenval and a delegation of 12 senior Oramni officials were transported to the human vessel by a shuttle that moved so smoothly it felt stationary. The human flagship was not named. It bore a numerical designation, Authority Vessel 7. The interior was functional, efficient, no decoration, no art. Every surface served a purpose. The humans had built a warship, not a palace. They were led to a conference room. 12 humans waited, seated around a table that was too small for the combined delegation. Cramped, intentionally so. The humans had not designed the room for comfort. They had designed it for focus. Dr. James Hayden led the human delegation. He was older than the other humans. Gray hair, weathered features, eyes that carried a weight Dorenval recognized. The weight of someone who had seen too much and could not unsee it. "Presider," Hayden began, "we will be direct. The entity in your territory is not a weapon, not a fleet, not a natural phenomenon. It is an organism." Dorenval had expected many things. This was not one of them. "An organism," she repeated. "A macroscopic spatial organism. It exists partially in normal space and partially in a dimensional layer that your sensors cannot access. That is why you cannot detect it. It is not hiding. It is simply not entirely here." "Explain." Hayden activated a display. It showed a cross-section of the affected zone, not the surface view the Oramni had mapped, a deeper view, layers, dimensions. The human sensors had peered into places the Oramni did not know existed. "The organism feeds on sentient consciousness. Not matter, not energy, consciousness, the awareness of intelligent beings. It targets species with large, distributed populations. It removes the consciousness from the physical body and absorbs it. The bodies remain. The infrastructure remains. Only the minds are taken." Dorenval felt something cold move through her. "The 700 billion citizens we lost. Their minds. You are saying their minds were consumed." "Yes, their bodies are in stasis, alive but unthinking. If the organism is neutralized, they may be recoverable. We cannot be certain." "And the organism is growing, accelerating." "Correct. Each consciousness it absorbs increases its mass in the dimensional layer. More mass means more feeding capacity. More feeding capacity means faster expansion. It is a consumption loop, exponential by nature." Dorenval looked at the display. The cross-section showed the organism's true extent. It was not a zone of empty space. It was a creature, vast, layered, woven through the fabric of reality, larger than any physical structure the Oramni had ever conceived. "You said you can develop a countermeasure." Hayden nodded. "The organism has a vulnerability. It exists in two-dimensional layers simultaneously, normal space and what we call the deep layer. Its consciousness is anchored in the deep layer. If we can sever that anchor, the organism will collapse. It will lose its grip on normal space. The dimensional structure it has woven will unravel." "How do you sever the anchor?" "We build a device that operates in the deep layer, a resonator, tuned to the organism's anchor frequency. Activate the resonator and the anchor dissolves. The organism loses its foundation. It falls." "You have this technology." "We have the theoretical framework. We do not have the device. Building it will require resources we do not currently possess in sufficient quantity. We need your help." The Oramni, helping the humans, the species that had been deemed unsuitable for mentorship, asking for the mentor's resources. The irony was not lost on Dorinval. "What do you need?" Hayden pulled up a list: raw materials, energy sources, manufacturing capacity. The total requirement was enormous, more than the human fleet could produce alone, but within the capabilities of the Oramni Collective's remaining industrial base. "We also need time," Hayden said. "The device will take approximately 6 years to construct. Based on our projections, the organism will reach your core worlds in approximately 9 years. That gives us a margin of 3 years. 3 years is not much. It is more than you had yesterday." Dorinval could not argue with that. The construction of the resonator consumed the combined industrial output of 2 civilizations for 6 years. Human engineers and Oramni fabricators worked side by side. The cultural differences were immense. The Oramni were methodical, cautious, every step verified, every component tested. The humans were fast, aggressive, willing to accept risk in pursuit of speed. The friction was constant: arguments, disputes, near collapses of the joint operation. But the work continued. The resonator took shape in a construction yard that orbited a dying Oramni star. The device itself was not large, 200 meters across, a ring of interlocking components, each one precision manufactured to tolerances that exceeded anything either species had attempted before. The human deep layer technology and the Oramni material science combined to create something neither could have built alone. Year 3 of construction. The organism reached the Oramni core worlds. The evacuation that had been underway for years became a rout. Trillions of Oramni citizens streamed toward the rim, away from the advancing boundary. The human fleet provided escort. Human warships moved alongside Oramni transports. Human medical ships treated the injured. Human engineers repaired failing Oramni systems. The species that the Oramni had rejected was now their protector. Dorinval watched the evacuation from the bridge of an Oramni command vessel. Around her, human ships moved with efficiency that the Oramni military could not match. Not because the humans had more ships, they had fewer, but their ships were faster, more responsive, better coordinated. "Presider," said her aide, "the human fleet is repositioning. They are forming a line between the evacuation corridor and the advancing boundary. They are going to try to slow it down." "It appears so." Dorinval felt something she had not felt in years. Hope, small, fragile, but real. The human fleet engaged the organism's boundary. Not with conventional weapons, with the deep layer technology they had brought. The human ships generated fields that interfered with the organism's dimensional structure, not enough to stop it, but enough to slow it. The expansion rate, which had been accelerating for years, flattened, then began to decrease. The humans were fighting a creature that existed partially outside reality. And they were winning. Not permanently, not decisively, but they were buying time. Every day the expansion was slowed was another day for the evacuation, another day for the resonator's construction. The human fleet held the line for 4 months. In month 3, they lost their first ship. The organism adapted. It developed a response to the interference fields, a counter-frequency that disrupted the human generators, one ship at a time, isolating them, stripping their crews, adding their consciousness to its mass. The humans did not retreat. They adjusted, modified their frequencies, developed new protocols, lost a ship, learned from it, adapted, lost another, learned again. 7 human ships were consumed in 4 months, 700 crew members, their minds taken by the organism, their bodies left drifting in empty vessels. The humans kept fighting. Dorinval asked Hayden why, after the loss of the 5th ship, after the human casualties had begun to mount, why not fall back? Why not wait for the resonator? Hayden's answer was short. Because every day we hold the line is a day your people live. We came here to help. Helping means cost. We accepted the cost before we arrived. Dorinval had no response. In the Oramni's 53,000 years, they had mentored 47 species. They had given freely, generously, without expectation of return. But they had never given at this cost. They had never bled for another species. The humans had arrived 11 years ago, and they were bleeding. For the Oramni. For a species that had rejected them. Year 6, Month 11, Day 23. The resonator was complete. It hung in space above the construction yard, 200 meters of interlocking components, silent, inert, waiting. The organism was 14 light-years from the construction site. The evacuation of the Oramni core was 97% complete. 3% of the core population remained. Approximately 21 trillion citizens, still in transit, still moving toward the rim. 14 light-years. At the organism's current expansion rate, adjusted for the human fleet's interference, it would reach the construction site in approximately 40 days. 40 days, enough time to deploy the resonator, barely. Hayden addressed the combined fleet from the bridge of Authority Vessel 7. Human and Oramni crews listened on every ship, every station, every outpost. The resonator is complete. Deployment requires us to move it to the organism's anchor point. Based on our analysis, the anchor is located at the original point of manifestation. The first world that went silent, 17 planets, the center of the affected zone. Dorinval calculated the distance, approximately 40,000 light-years from the construction site. At our best transit speed, that is a journey of approximately 3 days, Hayden continued. We will escort the resonator to the anchor point. We will deploy it. We will activate it. If our calculations are correct, the organism will collapse within hours of activation. And if your calculations are wrong, an Oramni commander asked. Then we will adapt, as we have done for the past 6 years. The fleet assembled, 300 human warships, 2,000 Oramni vessels, a combined force that represented the surviving military power of both civilizations, escorting a device the size of a small asteroid across 40,000 light-years. The journey took 3 days and 4 hours. The fleet arrived at the anchor point, the original 17 worlds, the place where the Oramni had first lost their citizens, empty worlds, silent cities, preserved in the moment of abandonment. The resonator was positioned at the calculated anchor coordinate, between the 17 worlds, at the center of a web of dimensional forces that the human sensors could map, but the Oramni could not perceive. Deploying the resonator, Hayden announced. The device released from its transport cradle. It drifted into position. Activation sequences initiated. The ring began to spin, slowly at first, then faster. Components shifted, aligned, calibrated to a frequency that existed in a layer of reality most species did not know was there. The organism reacted. Not gradually, instantly. The entire affected zone shuddered. The boundary which had been expanding for 11 years stopped, not slowed, stopped. Every human ship in the fleet reported the same phenomenon. The dimensional interference that the humans had been fighting for months simply ceased. It knows, Hayden said. It can feel the resonator. It is pulling its awareness back toward the anchor point. Is that dangerous? Dorinval asked. It means the organism is concentrating its consciousness at a single location. If the resonator fails, the concentrated organism will be more powerful than the distributed version, more dangerous, more capable. Then we cannot fail. No, we cannot. The resonator reached full operational speed. The ring was spinning at a rate that made it blur. Energy crackled along its surface, not in normal space, in the deep layer. The human crew could see it on their instruments. The Oramni could see nothing, but they could feel it. Every Oramni in the fleet felt a vibration, not physical, mental, a resonance in their consciousness, as if something was touching their minds, not the organism, the resonator tuning itself, calibrating to the frequency of sentient awareness. Because that was what the organism fed on, consciousness, and the resonator operated on the same frequency. It used the organism's own food against it. Resonator is calibrated, reported the device's chief engineer, a human named Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo. Anchor frequency locked, ready for activation on your command. Hayden looked at Doranval. This was not his decision alone. The Oramni had lost more than any civilization in galactic history. 53,000 years of culture, 14,000 worlds, 700 trillion citizens. If the resonator failed, the Oramni had nothing left to lose. If it succeeded, they had everything to regain. Doranval met Hayden's eyes. "Activate it," she said. Okonkwo pressed the control. The resonator screamed. Not audibly, mentally. Every sentient being within 40,000 light-years heard it, a sound that bypassed ears and went directly to the mind, a frequency that resonated with the fundamental structure of consciousness itself. The organism screamed back. The two sounds collided in the deep layer. The resonator's tone was precise, measured, engineered. The organism's tone was raw, wild, desperate, the sound of a predator that had never been challenged suddenly facing something it could not consume. The resonator's frequency intensified. It found the anchor point, the place where the organism's consciousness was tethered to the deep layer. It pressed against that anchor, applied force, not physical force, dimensional force, the kind of pressure that existed between layers of reality. The anchor held for 11 minutes. On the 12th minute, it began to crack. The organism thrashed. In normal space, the effects were visible. The empty world shook. Cities that had stood untouched for 11 years began to crumble. The ocean on the third planet boiled. The atmosphere on the seventh ignited. The organism was lashing out, destroying the physical remnants of the worlds it had emptied. The fleet pulled back. Human shields flared. Oramni hulls groaned. The destruction was immense, but it was confined to the 17 worlds. The organism was concentrating everything at the anchor point, everything it had, every bit of consciousness it had consumed over 11 years. 700 trillion Oramni minds, focused on a single point, fighting to hold the anchor. The resonator pressed harder. On minute 19, the anchor cracked. On minute 20, it split. On minute 21, it shattered. The sound stopped. Not gradually, all at once. The scream cut off as if a throat had been closed. The deep layer went silent. The dimensional structure that the organism had woven through 40,000 light-years of space began to unravel, layer by layer, thread by thread, like a tapestry being pulled apart. In normal space, the effects were immediate. Across the entire affected zone, bodies stirred. On every empty world, on every abandoned station, on every ship that had been stripped of its crew, 700 billion Oramni citizens who had been locked in stasis for 11 years opened their eyes. Not all of them. The organism had consumed some minds entirely, dissolved them. Those bodies remained empty, but the majority survived, waking, confused, disoriented, but alive. The organism was gone, not destroyed, dissolved, its consciousness dispersed across the deep layer, scattered into fragments too small to maintain coherence, too small to feed, too small to think. A predator that had existed for longer than the Oramni civilization had been unmade by a device 200 meters across. Built in 6 years. By 2 species working together. One of them the prey. The other a species the prey had once called unsuitable. The recovery took decades. 21 trillion Oramni citizens needed to be relocated. Worlds needed to be rebuilt. Infrastructure restored. Society reconstructed from the remnants of what the organism had left behind. The humans stayed. Not forever, but long enough. They provided technology, expertise, labor. Their deep layer sensors mapped the entire former affected zone, identifying worlds that could be reoccupied and those that were too damaged. Their construction vessels helped rebuild. Their medical ships treated the survivors. Hayden remained for 11 years. He stood beside Doranval when the first reclaimed world was formally reopened. An Oramni colony on the edge of the original affected zone. 7 billion citizens returning to a world that had been empty for over a decade. "Why did you come?" Doranval asked him. She had asked before. He had given answers, technical answers, strategic answers, but she wanted the real answer, the one beneath the others. Hayden looked at the planet below, green and blue and alive. Oramni ships descending through the atmosphere, people going home. 400 years ago, your species looked at mine and decided we were not worth mentoring, he said. Too violent, too stubborn, too unpredictable. Yes. You were right, we are all of those things, but you missed something else. What? We are also relentless. When we see a problem, we do not debate it for 40 years. We do not calculate the political cost. We do not weigh whether the species in trouble is worth saving. We see a problem and we go to work. That is who we are. Doranval said nothing. Your signal reached us 17 years ago. We read it. We analyzed it. We understood the threat. And we started working. Not because you asked. Not because we owed you. Because the problem existed and we were there. That is the only reason we needed. Doranval turned from the viewport. The Oramni mentored 47 species. We gave them technology, knowledge, guidance. We thought that was cultivation. It was. But we never bled for any of them. We never risked our own people. We gave from abundance, from safety, from a position of superiority. You gave from scarcity, from danger, from a position of equality. That is different. Hayden nodded. We do not call it cultivation. We call it showing up. It is not complicated. It is not noble. It is just what you do when someone calls. Doranval looked at the planet, at the ships, at the people coming home. The galaxy needs more of that, she said. It does, Hayden agreed. But that is not our decision to make. Every species chooses its own way. The Oramni chose cultivation. The humans choose showing up. Other species will choose other things. The only thing we can do is be what we are, and hope it is enough. He turned to leave. James, Doranval said. He stopped. She used his first name. She had never done that before. Yes. 400 years ago, we called your species unsuitable for mentorship. I want to correct that record. You do not need to. I want to. Not because you proved us wrong, because we were asking the wrong question. We asked whether humanity was suitable for Oramni mentorship. The real question was whether the Oramni were suitable for humanities. Hayden smiled. It was the first time Doranval had seen him smile. No offense, Presider, but you were not. Doranval laughed, the first time she had laughed in 12 years. No, she agreed, we were not. Hayden departed the following week. Authority Vessel 7 and its escort fleet jumped to transit and disappeared. Gone. Back to whatever deep space patrol they had been running when the Oramni signal arrived. Back to listening. Back to watching. Back to being the species that showed up. Doranval stood on the surface of the reclaimed world and watched the sky. Somewhere out there, in the gaps between civilizations, human ships were patrolling, listening for distress calls, watching for threats, being what they were. Relentless. Stubborn. Present. The Oramni would rebuild. It would take centuries, maybe millennia, but they would rebuild. And when they were done, they would not be the same civilization they had been before. They would be something new, something that had learned from the species that had come when no one else would. A species that had sent one signal and received an answer that changed everything. Not because the answer was powerful, because someone answered. This is Apex Chronicle. When the call goes out, someone always comes. We will see you in the next one.